Hey everyone, Nick Engvall here. Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you about some of the people that make the sneaker history community and this podcast possible. It's more important than ever to think about who you give your money to when you're buying clothing to go with your kicks. Our friends at Guilty Goods started their brand with a goal of giving back, especially to the communities that make sneaker culture possible. With every purchase from Guilty Goods, at least 10% of the proceeds are donated to organizations like Big Brothers and Big Sisters, the Susan G. Komen Foundation, the Movement for Black Lives, and many more. You can save 30% on your order by using the code HISTORY at guiltygoods.us. Again, that's history at guiltygoods.us for 30% off, and you can feel good about your purchase knowing you're supporting a meaningful cause. Sneakers are all about presentation, and if you're like me, displaying your kicks at home or in the office is just as important as when they're on your feet. Sneaker Throne makes sneaker display cases featuring customizable LED lights, drop-side cases to showcase the entire side of the shoe, not just the heel or the toe, the whole shoe. They've also got display cases for trading card collectors and hat collectors. To me, it's the perfect way to display your collection. You can save at least 10% on your Sneaker Throne order by using the code HISTORY at sneakerthrone.com. That's history at sneakerthrone.com. If you're a Patreon supporter or a member of our Discord community, you already know about Kicks with V hot sauce and his small batch, locally sourced hot sauce. V has been one of the biggest supporters of sneaker history and the podcast since the early days. He's currently the defending champion in our community trivia nights competition. Kicks with V hot sauce has been a huge hit with the community. You can save 10% on your order by using the code SneakerHistory10 at kickswithvhots.com. That's SneakerHistory10 at kickswithvhots.com. Now, you're probably here because you like sneakers, and if you join the Discord, you know our community is about so much more than that. Whether it's the marathon-like community calls, trivia night debates, the in-person meetups, or just sharing our favorite experiences, we found that although we have such different backgrounds, we all have some unexpected shared passions. Not only does the entire community look out for each other when it comes to releases, we're like a support group for life in general. You can join the Discord community for free by heading to the show notes of this episode. After you're done listening to this episode, tell someone you like their kicks today. You never know how far a simple compliment can take you, and we all know how good it feels to have someone show their appreciation. Now let's get into today's episode.
Jordan trying to shake off Starks. Oh, what a James with no regard for human life. Final seconds. Bryant for the win. Iverson against Gill. The crowd on its feet. Allen for the win.
Welcome to the Sneaker History Podcast.
What up? What up? Welcome back to the Sneaker History Podcast. My name is Nick Engvall. I'm with my guys, Mike and Robbie, to talk some kicks. But we're going to do it a little bit different today. So I'm going to just say, how's it going, fellas, and toss it to you guys and let you guys run the show.
Yo, man, it's going good, going good. How you doing, Robbie?
I was about to say, are you doing like a Tom Green show thing where it's like, I'm Tom Green. This is the Tom Green show. I'm going to talk about Tom Green.
References from old 90s, 2000 shows.
No diggity. But, I'm good. Today we're going to be flipping the mic or flipping the mirror and having Nick look back at his life as we go through the life tale that is Nick Engvall. And 2 other episodes, we went over my past and Mike's past. So we thought it'd be a good opportunity for you to get to know the founder of sneaker history a little bit better. So as you put me on the spot and I had trouble with it, tell us something about yourself, Nick, that doesn't have to do about shoes.
Doesn't have to do with shoes. Oh, damn.
Right?
Tough one.
Yeah.
Cars.
Yeah, cars. So other than sneakers, I'm like massively into cars. Anything that has basically, tires, wheels, an engine, a motor. It doesn't really matter. Electric cars, whatever. I'm just super passionate about it and curious about it. So I've been really into the Honda scene since I was a really young teenager. Both my parents got divorced, but both sets of parents, I guess, or both parents ended up having Honda Civics in the 70s. And that kind of just set the course for our whole family's really into Hondas. So if you're into Hondas, I have 2 92 Acura Integra GSRs, which is the first time that we got the dual overhead cam VTEC motors here in the United States. So they're pretty special to me. One's red and one's white, and I've got almost probably as many car parts in storage as I do sneakers. So I'm basically a hoarder. That's what I should just say. Something you didn't know about me. If you didn't know, I'm completely a hoarder. So.
Here's an alternator and some Adidas Superstars, you know.
Let me get the grease off of those for you real fast. I'm sorry about that.
It really is that bad, though. I mean, no. Just kidding.
So where do you see, if you can give us this, like the biggest correlation between shoes and cars? What's like the biggest thing you notice that there's overlay between the two?
So like growing up in California, and even though I moved around a lot, a lot of my family is still here, has always been here. And I've always come back to California, even though I've liked to move around and experience new places. But it's just such a way to be unique, an individual, a way to feel like you're doing something, to be different than everyone, but at the same time, it's just this great way to connect with people and make friends. And, some of my like best friends for the past, I'm 40 years old, and for the past 20 something years, guys that I met when I was 18, 19 years old, I met because I was wearing a very specific t-shirt back in the day. If anybody remembers I Love Racing, the Pacific Rim tees that they sold with like the little Civics on them and CRXs and stuff. I got a job, used to work in the on cars doing like stereos, alarms, electronics, all sorts of different stuff. But I got a job and, kind of like first day at that job working, I was selling car stereos at that time. And I kind of came into the job wearing that t-shirt, and a bunch of the dudes were like, wait, especially because I'm white, right? Like they didn't realize, they don't think of it. It's like, so it just turned into like, lifelong friendships, like these guys have been like my brothers since then. So, it's a very similar thing. There's a lot of crossover, and, if Barry that runs, United Kicks, he's one of those guys that kind of from the Bay Area, came up in the same era, about my age, and there's so much crossover in it. So you were always having conversations about both these things with your friends, and both of these passions kind of overlap so much that it's almost like you had friends that came in from one, like maybe one of your buddies was a car guy, but came in and then became a sneaker dude because he was around us all the time, and we were talking about both of them, or vice versa, right? You come in, on the sneaker side, and then next thing you know, you're buying cars and fixing up your cars and going to car shows with all these same people. So very similar, I guess, passions.
Man, I was waiting for you to say that you worked in a car shop. You made a group of friends and started knocking off 18-wheelers. I'm like, I think Nick's life was the premise of Fast and the Furious for a second.
I mean, I definitely. So I don't condone any kind of street racing. I'm really not into, drag racing. I'm really into like road racing type stuff. I've built a couple of cars, for my brother to race. I'm not like it's kind of like with sneakers. Like I'm not like the guy that's like, I want to go drive and I want to be the face of this. It's more like I see it as a very cool business, a very cool marketing opportunity, a way to, bring attention to things that you're passionate about in really challenging, but, like good challenging kind of ways.
Yeah.
So, for me, it was never really about like going out and racing people. I mean, I definitely went to my share of street races back in the day, and, thankfully didn't get into too much trouble, but I think once you got to a certain point and you realized you could do things, and for me, always wanting to like be on the business side, like do things, that supported everyone's passion legally, I think that really changed my perspective on what I should be doing in the car world, so, but yeah, I was, I was like almost everybody else at that time when Fast and Furious came out, where like, we were all stoked to go and we all wanted to go. I was living in Sacramento at the time, my hometown, but Unfortunately, Sacramento is also like one of the highest car theft places in the freaking United States. So most of us didn't even take our cars because we knew that people would be jacking cars in the parking lot because you knew you were going to be leaving it out there for a couple hours to watch the movie. So, but yeah, it's been a fun journey, and it's really just about meeting people and connecting and sharing those passions. And to me, it's almost exactly the same. It's just a different a different level of commitment when it comes to pricing.
Is there a car shoe? Like, does everybody just wear Chucks like Paul Walker? I mean, is there like more of like I don't want to say like a brand, but like any type of like specific model you see around a lot or brand you see a lot?
Puma Speed Cats, the Ferrari shoes.
Yeah, so I mean
Puma. So I know that's not your life though.
Well, so Chucks was definitely like it's one of my favorite shoes. So I mean, I have probably 40 pair of Chucks, like all different colors. Like any collabs that were cool that I thought were cool. Like, I mean, Chucks has just always been one of my favorites. Part of that is just because growing up and not having, money to buy sneakers, you could get Chucks, and also looking up to, the like the hip hop artists that I looked up to, like NWA and even House of Pain, like those guys all wore Chucks. So it was kind of like a staple in hip hop in the late 80s. And, that to me became like the shoe, and it's really kind of a generic shoe anyway, but there's definitely a lot of real niche things in the car world. So you could have, guys that like to wear like driving shoes, which is like the Puma Speed Cat, Pelote is a brand that makes a lot of like really nice driving shoes. There's like BMW, Ferrari versions from Puma, and I think most people would consider that like more European style shoes. But I think with the Fast and Furious, like Chucks were really, really popular at that time anyway in my kind of circle. But like, I think it really pushed that kind of simplistic look into, I don't want to call it fashion, but it really was like streetwear fashion, whatever. It's like you still had all the people wearing all the different variety of stuff. And like, if you go to a car meet today, you're going to see everything that we would talk about on a regular episode. All the stuff that, dudes are wearing Air Maxes and Dunks and Jordans and, any kind of Asics and Adidas and collabs and all that stuff. It's like very much heavily overlapped now to where there's a lot of diversity in the shoes that people are wearing. But I think in general, like in the late 90s, when I kind of mid to late 90s, I guess I should say, like when I really got into working on cars, I was one of those people that basically wore skate shoes or wore Chucks. And then when I started to kind of like really get more, I guess when I started making better money doing that stuff, the first Black Cat 4 release, like that became my work shoe. I bought 2 pairs. I just destroyed them for 2 years straight. You can imagine like, how shoes get beat up when you're constantly working on cars and, tucked under dashes and underneath the hood and all this stuff. And so that kind of just became like, okay, cool. Like, a way for me to express my sneaker passion through just like my everyday stuff. But there was always like, I don't want to say like there weren't rules or anything about it, but there were definitely, certain people that you worked for that were like, make sure you stick to the dress code kind of thing, and you have to wear all black or black shoes or whatever. And it wasn't that serious, but you know how it is. Like everybody, anybody that worked in a retail store or in a shop at some point knows that, those dudes that are like 40, 50 years old, just basically there to tell you what to do. And, they always had an issue with something. So some days it would be your shoes, and other days it would be like your shirt's not buttoned to right, or your shirt's not tucked in, or name tag, blah, 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 blah. So,
Jeez. Well, dang. I mean, so I knew you love cars. I didn't know the depth. I didn't know you actually worked in, part of the car industry. So that is something I learned new about Nick today.
Oh yeah, I spent let's see, probably a solid like 6, 7, 8 years working on cars in some form.
Nice.
I at one point I was building like the crazy stereo systems and custom stuff, doing basically at that time it was like only the guys that were selling weed had enough money to buy a $20,000 system for their Tahoe, but that kind of was
flip out screens and all that crazy stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we used to, we literally used to build boxes. I remember we built a couple of boxes where, you look in the back of the Tahoe and it's like, you see the two subs, 15s or something. And then there's like a centerpiece where you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. You guys incorporated like a JL Audio, if you're familiar, the JL Audio logo. And so like, but what we actually did was we made that logo. We would use like push pins. So you could press on that logo and it would pop open, and it was a place for those guys to stash their weed, kind of like a stash pocket on sneakers, So that was kind of like we did a lot of that actually. Like that was kind of just the norm back then, right? Because most people that wanted stereo systems weren't spending that kind of crazy money. So when we got to do the really cool shit, like it was usually somebody that is either really, really wealthy otherwise, or had special requests like that.
Hey, I need this extra hideaway box. Don't ask questions.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, so when did you find, I mean, clearly you already had a love for sneakers, but when did you find a transition? Like, I want to move from cars and I want to go ahead and pursue a career on the sneaker side.
I guess I'll go back a little bit before that. So after like working on cars for quite a while, I ended up getting a job doing sales for AT&T, and you made really good money, commission, all that kind of stuff. And you worked out of one of those, like back then it was like, it's retail, but it's like half office retail kind of. It's very unique kind of setup. And now the stores are similar to that, but I approached it differently. So I basically was like, I'm going to go get like 100 phone deal with somebody working for the state of California, or, the county or some business. So I would go after like massive level stuff. Even though I wasn't an outside salesperson, I was supposed to be just dealing with people that were coming into that particular office. But that basically made me realize like I didn't really want to do that job, because I didn't want to spend so much time doing it the way they told me to do it. I wanted to do it the way that I thought was most efficient. Mm-hmm. In doing that, I started doing other stuff on the side, because I basically cut my hours down to part-time. It was like, okay, well, I'm going to make this good money doing it part-time, 20, 25 hours a week. And I'm still making, a full-time salary at a company that pays pretty well. So that led me into, like I started selling car parts on eBay, and this is like, 2000, 2001, 2002-ish. And my dad at the time was teaching people like basic computer stuff, like he was teaching people how to use eBay. He actually was a partner with eBay, where he, was like a certified educator for them for a while. So we went to different places and taught. We went to like these conventions put on by eBay. So it was a cool learning experience for me. And sneakers was always a part of my eBay thing, just searching. And I didn't really sell stuff. I would get rid of stuff occasionally if I wasn't wearing it, but most of the time I was just looking for stuff. And unfortunately, my dad had a seizure, and in California, they take away your license if you have a seizure. So his license got suspended for a year, and he basically asked me to help him with his business. And I spent like all of that time basically going with him to these classes that he was teaching, right? And sometimes it would be super basic stuff. This is 20 years ago. So there wasn't, like I use Photoshop, 50 to 100 times a day right now doing the work that I do. Back then, I was using, Microsoft Paint and all the stuff trying to figure out how to do it because Adobe was so expensive. Like, that's kind of how drastic it was. But also the learning curve for all that stuff was crazy. So you had to spend a lot of time to learn. And, thinking about like the older generation, they didn't know what the hell was coming at them with a computer. So anyway, my dad, I started helping him. I started driving him to his classes, doing all that stuff. And I had always written. I never really wrote publicly. I did like back when I was in school, and actually like in like 8th, 9th grade, I like won. I won like a couple of writing contests and ended up finishing second in the state at one point in one of the contests, which is kind of bananas to think about now. But I never really thought of that as a way to go for work. But in one of my dad's classes, if you're listening, love you, Dad, but the class is so boring as somebody who's seen it 10 times or 20 times. I just started writing my story about basically True Blue 3s and military 4s and like Jordans and like why I got into them. And that kind of started the thought process of like, wow, like maybe I could turn this into, like, I don't know, like some sort of book or magazine or something. Soul Collector was around, but like I wasn't thinking like that I would just tell my story and put it into Soul Collector, right? Mm-hmm. So essentially writing that, I had written that, and then I had decided to move to Austin, Texas. This is maybe a year and a half later, 2007 or so. I basically moved down there. The girl I was dating at the time had moved and was like, I'm just going to go and see what happens. And thankfully, it didn't work out with her, but I did end up the first weekend that I was basically there, I had applied for some jobs working on cars, doing, electronics and stuff. And I was supposed to start on Monday, and Sunday night I look on Craigslist and there's an ad for asking if anybody knows sneakers and knows how to write, if they'd want to write about sneakers. So I basically had that story from, about the Jordan 4 and why I was into like Jordans and sneakers and stuff like that. But it wasn't finished. It was like, it was like 3-4 pages long, but it wasn't, I hadn't gotten into it, like I'm long-winded when I get really deep into the stories. And I didn't really know what I was doing with that anyway. So it was like, okay, well, I'm just going to send this to them. What's even crazier is I only took like basically one bag and my backpack. And I happened to, so back then, if I wrote anything or did any work, I would move it to a hard drive. So I had room on my laptop for it to actually do the work. And I had moved that. I didn't even bring the hard drive with me to Texas because I just was like, I'm going to go. But I had moved that story back onto the laptop that I had because I wanted to finish it. And so I literally sent that story to this Craigslist ad. And it's like, midnight, 12:30 in the morning on a Sunday night. And I'm supposed to be going to a job at, 10 o'clock the next morning. And within like 10, 15 minutes, somebody replies and, turns out that it was Matt and his former wife, Allison, from Nice Kicks back in the day. And basically it's like, you want to come in tomorrow for an interview? And it's like, I literally was like, okay, I'm not going to take the job that's guaranteed. I'm going to this interview. And, it was so obvious that I was meant to be in that place because here's a website that is just basically becoming a blog and trying to figure it out. Up until that point, it had been Matt by himself, basically writing everything on the site. And they had decided to hire 4 people. So they hired myself, George Keel, Peter Sim, and Greg Grovey. And all 4 of those guys, we all started the same day. And we really kind of just, made Nice Kicks a thing, right? Like it was, Matt was doing well with it before, but, the blog style of what the site became versus what they were doing before, that was like the perfect timing because everybody wanted to know what was going on in sneakers. So we were just cranking out posts. You know, we would do 10, 15, 20, 30 posts in a day just talking about sneakers. And it was such a cool experience because nobody was doing it at that time. You know, like the only other place that you would see it was, Sneaker News was there and they were just getting started. Kicks on Fire was just getting started. Complex hadn't really done a whole lot on the digital front. They were still focusing on the print magazine. And then Soul Collector and Nike Talk and those kind of places were all forum based. So they hadn't really transitioned to the full on blog style. So it was just a really cool time. And that was kind of like the first like real time that I got paid to do something in sneakers other than, you know, trying to help out friends that had, you know, that worked at stores or trying to do, you know, like random stuff here and there. But
did you work in a store as well?
Nope, I never worked in a store. I always wanted to work in a store, but like unfortunately, like or fortunately, I guess, however you want to look at it, like the money that I made doing sales at AT&T part time was, you know, astronomical compared to what I would have made at a Foot Locker or a Foot Action or something like that back in the day. So I just really was not going to go anywhere unless it was something that I was super passionate about, which was always either cars. And then like the Nice Kicks thing happened, you know, 2007 or so when I moved to Austin, Texas, and kind of just set off a crazy journey for me, really. So.
Yeah, we do the Michael Jordan Last Dance thing, and we'll pop back into this time. But there's a question we've all answered that we forgot to ask you. So let's rewind it probably about 15, 20 years from there. And let's go back to like, what was the first like Nick shoe, like first real pair of sneakers Nick had? And then we'll come back and we'll get the post Nice Kicks.
All right. So the first, I guess, real pair of shoes. So I had a pair of, so in basically seventh grade, my brother and I would draw sneakers all the time, like from like way back, like back to like third, fourth grade, talking like the original, like we were obsessed with the Air Max 90 and the Huarache. Like to this day, both of us, like those are two of our favorite shoes, respectively. And we would draw them all the time. We would draw our versions of them, like how we would make them the next time around, blah, blah, blah. So I always had a $30 budget for sneakers for year, right? So we would basically go to, you know, Payless, Mervyn's, any of those like more discounted retailers, and never really got brand name shoes. And in seventh grade, I basically like pitched to my my mom and stepdad and said, I will take the $30 from next year and the $30 from this year and buy one pair of shoes so I can get some Nikes and have it for 2 years. And I'll just keep that pair for the 2 years. You know, my parents, I mean, I'm thankful that they let me do it, but they probably were like, kid, you're an idiot, man. Like you're going to burn through these shoes and they're going to stink and like no air, like all that stuff. But they let me do it. So I got a pair of, is the Nike Ultra Force, and like this white with gray and blue color. I played basketball in them. I skateboarded in them. I beat them to a pulp, and then I repainted them every couple of months. Like, I mean, I like mixed the grays to make sure I had it right when I repainted them. I glued the holes in the bottom thinking that I was going to keep the air cushioning in there somehow. Like, but that was like my first real shoe.
You did what? You did
literally glued like hot glue like when the soles wore down and they started squeaking because the air was going in and out of the sole. So I literally filled it with glue thinking like, oh, this'll will keep the air in there, right? Didn't
so
work.
You invented slime for tires. You realize that, right? Like, you invented that. And you have not gotten your money for it, just FYI.
Man, I wish I would have thought of that at the time, man.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so that was my first real pair of shoes, seventh and 8th grade.
That's some like real. So like, you know how like Balenciaga or somebody released some shoes with like tape on them, and like, you know what I'm talking about? Some like high retailer that have like purposeful like duct tape looking stuff on the shoe, or like glue all over the place. Nick was the OG of that game.
Look, he invented stuff, created trends. He didn't even know what he did back then.
No, those shoes are they stunk so bad, man.
Hashtag antidote fresh.
Yeah, seriously.
So, I mean, okay, starts with that shoe. Chucks were a big part of your life. Like, what are some, like, you know, everybody's taste changes. I can definitely tell you shoes that I liked, you know, 50 years ago that I like, oh man, why? No. So like, what was Nick's, before you got that story written about the 3s and 4s, like what were you into like leading up to your professional life? Like what are some of Nick's fan favorites?
So I always had Chucks. I always loved Stan Smiths. Those were always like close to being able to afford them. So as soon as I started like doing side jobs, shoveling snow, mowing lawns, doing yard work, all that stuff, like that would be one of the shoes that I would kind of always have. I almost always have a fresh pair of Stan Smiths. The Nike Air Lambaste we've talked about, you know, like the takedown of the Go LWP. The Nike Air Gone is another one that was like my kind of one of my first few like purchases once I started working. So I started working pretty young. Like I was doing side jobs at like 12, 13. I bought my first car at 13. It didn't run. It was an old Honda Prelude. And yeah, like my stepdad, like, you know, was super supportive and was like, you know, I had saved up money and, you know, it was a terrible idea, but I couldn't figure out how to get it running. Like the crazy vacuum lines in the early 80s and all the emissions and stuff, like it just didn't work out. And it ended up having like a bunch of rust on it too, but it was like, I got it. I want to say, I know we paid $150 for it. You know, thankfully my stepdad helped me tow it, you know, had like a pickup back then. And, you know, it just like, that was one of my like things. So I did a lot of landscaping work when I was like 13, 14, 15, because one of my brother's, like grade school teachers owned a landscaping company. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of, you know, kept me out of trouble, but also gave me like a taste of having money to spend on my own. And my first pair of Jordans is the Air Jordan 9, Charcoal 9. You know, that was like a big decision for me because I worked basically all summer, and that was a shoe I wanted to like wear going to school and you know, freshman year or whatever. And I remember specifically going in, and that the 10s are already out, but the 9 was on sale, and the Carnivore was also on sale. And I ended up choosing the 9. So I've always wanted a pair of Carnivores, that like original, like green and purple colorway, but I've never gotten them. But I always think about that. That was like one of the first kind of like purchases. Yeah. Like even before, you know, so my parents probably wouldn't want me saying this out loud, but my stepdad was always traveling for work. So when I was like 14, 15, you know, not old enough to drive, I was still driving my parents' minivan and taking my brothers to, you know, practice, and my sister to school and all those kind of things. Running to get groceries. Like, I mean, I don't condone this. It's illegal, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, you got to do what you got to do when, you know, the family needs help. So that kind of turned into me doing a lot of different like work. So on top of the landscaping and all of that kind of stuff, my very first, like, I guess, real job where I got a check and not cash, was umpiring Little League games at like 15 years old. So I was umpiring, like, you know, for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, as a 15-year-old. And let me just tell you, if you're a parent, calm down. It's okay. The kids should just be able to play.
Right.
It's like, people were nuts, man. But yeah,
That's when you learn to chill.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, honestly, sneakers it was one of those things where it was perfect timing, right? I think being a little bit older than you guys, the pressure of wanting all that stuff was a little bit different, because it was really like the only escape we had from, you know, normal life, I guess, if that makes sense.
Now sneakers are normal life.
Yeah.
But I just heard that whole story, and I just hear Nick's a hustler, baby. He just wants you to know it ain't where he's been, where he's about to go.
Now,
man.
we talked about the, you know, kind of like your first shoes that got you in, but we all want to know, when did you get your first pair of questions? What set you off on this trajectory of getting every question known to man?
You know, I probably got the first pair. I didn't get the first year that they came out. You know, my next pair of shoes after those charcoal 9s was actually, you know, playoff 11s. And let me see. Like, I guess there's probably maybe like, I probably bought like the Lambastes or something in between. My first pair of questions, I don't know what colorway I got first, but I always loved the low tops. So I would assume that they were probably like 98, 99. But I really couldn't tell you which one was the first one. I know that as soon as I got them, it started like a huge problem. I mean,
I can't stop.
Yeah. So I mean,
we have a problem.
Yeah. Honestly, like somewhere around that era, like late 90s, early 2000s, I became, you know, I was already obsessed with Iverson, but once I got a pair of his shoes, I mean, I had all the, like, you know, I started making my own money, like working, quote, real jobs. And so, like, I was obsessed with being able to buy sneakers. So my first year of college in Colorado Springs, I worked two serving jobs. I was able to schedule all of my classes on Monday. So I went to school from 7 a.m. till 9 o'clock at night on Mondays. And then I worked a serving job during the day, during the week. And then I bussed tables at night. And then I did, you know, bussing and serving over the weekend too. So I worked at a steakhouse and then at a Pizza Hut. And
when did you go to class?
I only went to class on Monday. So like all my classes were long. So it was like, instead of going twice a week, you would go for like 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So I didn't even have a break that whole Monday. Like I literally was like, pack my lunch, ate in class, like all that. And I mean, it was kind of like, I guess, telling as to how I approach life now, right? Like I really am about like condensing work to work on the things that I'm passionate about.
For sure.
So like when I do project work, I really like that because like you could give me a massive pile of stuff to do and I'll be like, okay, cool. I'm going to do this over the next 3 days, even though I have 3 weeks, and I'm going to be done with it because I just want to knock it out and, you know, have my free time to work on other things. So it was just, you know, it turned into like having that money. And, you know, if you've waited tables, I mean, the job is thankless, but you make good money, especially if you're a good people person. So I made really good money. It started the whole problem. I mean, I just basically I really did at one point try to get every Reebok question that was made. So probably from basically from 96 to, I don't know, probably 2010 or so, you know, I probably had like 90% of what was made, if not more. There's literally only a handful of Reeboks that I don't have, Reebok questions that I don't have. And I always loved other shoes, but like that became my obsession just because I loved that Iverson was different. Everybody loves Jordan, but I couldn't relate to how good he was in a sense. Like I always looked at Iverson as like, look, he's the short guy. Like I'm not as short as him. I mean, maybe I don't know, but like I'm 6'1", maybe 6'2" on a good day, but I'm not nearly as talented as a lot of people in everything that I've come across, but I will for sure like work my ass off to beat those people, even if it's only a once in a while thing. So that's why like Iverson related to me, right? It was like, he was this guy that was going to come in and even if you were 10 times as good as him, he was going to make you prove it to him. And that's just, I mean, even now I get goosebumps talking about it because I get so excited as to like, it's kind of like how sneaker history is, in my opinion, right? Like, I know there's a lot of people out there talking about sneakers. Like, we don't necessarily look at anybody as competition, but I look at what other people do. And I think, you know, on days where we really put a lot of effort into things, like I feel like our message and our content is equal, if not better than the most funded, you know, media companies out there. And so that kind of just has always been like the chip on my shoulder, I guess, and like how I related to it. And I mean, it's like, it's a blessing and a curse when it comes to collecting sneakers because, you know, questions are not near as comfortable as some of the other stuff that's out there, but it is what it is. I just became obsessed over it and wore them constantly for a while. So
1999 is when the low top released. So I think that's when the problem started for you.
Yeah, probably. And then it's, you know, once it's just one of those things where once when you haven't had something, and then once you figure out a way to have the money to have it, you just go so hard to get more of it. You know, I think like a lot of us can relate to that with sneakers where, you know, our parents didn't have the money to be buying us, you know, a crazy amount of shoes or even some, you know, expensive shoes. Like, and once you realize that, you know, there are other people that kind of understand your drive to be able to want that and do that for yourself, it becomes that much more, you become that much more passionate about it. So
a word, like when I ran up like $6,000 in credit card debt when I was like 20,
yeah, exactly.
27, it was like buying every shoe. Not that much, but yeah, I mean, I've atoned for my sins. Is once you think you have the money or you have the means, like you just said, it's just like, well, 90% of these shits are mine. Like it's gonna be an issue here.
I do guess I can blame Nick for some of my sneaker habit too, because in 07 is when I went to college. So that's when I started really getting heavy into like looking at like Nice Kicks and stuff. And I mean, clearly, I blame you, Nick. It's your fault.
Yeah. So, I mean, I worked at Nice Kicks about a year, maybe a year and a half. And I went through some craziness with the girl that I moved to Texas with, and I ended up like, Texas has a weird law where if you're on a lease, you have to have both people like okay terminating the lease or changing the lease. So even though we broke up and I wasn't living in the condo that we were renting, I was still having to pay my portion of the rent legally. So, but I was also paying for another place to live because I needed a place to live away from her. So it was like a crazy time. And, you know, eventually I was just like, okay, I've had, you know, Texas has had Austin. I've had my time in Austin. I'm ready to go back to California. And that's actually, I think like 2008 or 9 is when I first moved to LA. And that kind of turned into a little bit of drama with Nice Kicks because after I moved a couple months later, Nick DePaula, you know, I was in the Soul Collector forums all the time, Nike Talk all the time, but Nick saw that I saw some like conversation that I was having on the forums that I wasn't working at Nice Kicks anymore, and was like, "Hey, do you want to write for Soul Collector?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, this is like the dream," you know. I mean, I looked up to Russ Bankston and Slam Kicks, you know, like I wanted to write about sneakers. Once I realized it was a possibility and started to do it with you know, Nice Kicks. I mean, it's funny, like me and George Keel and Peter Sim and Greg Grovey would always just be like, man, look at this stuff. Like, we're basically getting paid to do what we love, and we get to play basketball in all these shoes. Like, you know, it's just such a crazy, surreal thing. And then for me, taking that one step further was like, how do I get to write for the magazine? And, you know, thankfully, like, they offered me a job. I got to work, you know, from home, working from LA, and it just turned into, you know, so much opportunity to learn and grow in the sneaker world. So about, I don't know, maybe like 6 months into working for Soul Collector, we were trying to partner with Eastbay to build their blog because they didn't have a blog at the time. And nobody from Soul Collector wanted to go up to Wisconsin because, you know, it's Wisconsin. If you've ever been to Wisconsin, or Eastbay is in a little town called Wausau, and it's tiny. It's like a very small town. You know, Eastbay and UPS are like the two biggest employers. I would imagine it's, you know, 10,000 people at most. But it's a really, it's like you fly into Minneapolis or Milwaukee, and then you get on a smaller plane, and then you fly to Wausau. So nobody wanted to go up there. And I was just like, it's Eastbay, you know, like, I want to do it. Like, I'll go up there. So I got to kind of be like the project manager of that, and, you know, work with, I mean, Nick DePaula was obviously a part of it. Steve Mulholland was, you know, kind of ran the ship at Soul Collector at that time. Brandon Richard was, you know, kind of, B Rich was like the like, you know, writer on the Soul Collector side. And then we kind of switched off and like kind of just, I mean, he didn't do any traveling. So I was always going up to Wisconsin with, you know, Steve, or sometimes by myself, and getting to know how the business works from that, on that side of things, was such an eye-opening experience, because I'm on the internet side where I'm like, everything's fast paced, you know, like I can find information and create a blog post almost out of thin air about a new release, where Eastbay is like, well, we do this in batches. We're going to buy, you know, this, it's going to come in 6 months or 9 months, and blah, blah, blah. And everything has to be planned to put, you know, okay, well, we're going to have banners on the site to match this if you're going to write a blog post. But it was also one of those things where, you know, nobody really looked at retail as, how do we create editorial content? So we expanded a lot of what that thought process was for a lot of people, because, you know, Eastbay, yes, is sneakers and sporting goods and, you know, uniforms and stuff like that, but everything that surrounds it is important, right? Like, so I got to write about baseball, I got to write about skate events, I got to write about basketball, about the March Madness, I got to write about football, about hockey, literally everything under the sun, because inevitably they were selling product that had some connection to these sports or these events. And it really just, like, once I saw how that worked, it was like, okay, like content, I was already 100% into writing, but like I really, really, really discovered like that I loved the kind of I would call it like architecture of like building content on a larger scale, right? Like where you're thinking about how a story can be, you know, blog, and that's the early stages of social. I mean, remember when I was at Nice Kicks, like they were making fun of me because I started hashtagging today's kicks on Twitter and post my sneakers every day. And, you know, eventually that became like their thing, was today's kicks, because, you know, it was like, what else are you going to share? Stuff you're passionate about. So getting to learn all this stuff along the way, you know, really just created so much opportunity. And, you know, I ended up leaving Soul Collector. I ended up like doing contract work for Eastbay. I ended up helping Foot Locker but create content around Sneakerpedia. that kind of was the first. I wanted to build something like Sneakerpedia before it existed, and that was kind of like, okay, like this would be cool to be a part of and work on. And sneaker history was kind of in the back of my mind at that point, but I hadn't really done anything, and like published a site or made any. I mean, I don't even think we were using Instagram back then because it's like 2012 or 13 or something. But it made me just realize that like I wanted to have something independent that was not, I guess like not controlled by the advertising dollars, right? Because at the end of the day, whether it's Eastbay or Soul Collector or not, not so much Nice Kicks because they were like more of a fresh start, but like Complex, like after a while, I had just kind of been doing contract work and freelancing, and Russ Bankston was like looking to hire somebody at Complex. So I went to Complex, moved to New York for a couple of years, and man, I mean, we didn't even have like Complex Sneakers Twitter or Instagram. Like I remember like starting those accounts from scratch, like it was so new, right? They were creating content on complex.com, but this is still all a part of like the main Complex feed of social stuff. So at that point, once we started to like divvy up where the content was going, we did like just ridiculous amounts of page views. I mean, so many people saw what we were doing, and that really, was a crazy experience for me, because about 2 months into being there, I had gotten hired as like an associate editor, which is, in the hierarchy of like what an actual like publication looks like. That's it's like one step above being an intern, right? It's like you're getting paid, but you're still doing a lot of like research, a lot of grunt work. It's not like you're the cool writer dude. So about 2 months of being in New York and working for Complex, I got called into the office and had to talk to the kind of the guy that ran all the people stuff, right? And it was one of those things where like the only time you got called into his office was basically you were going to get fired. So I had moved to New York and I'm thinking like, oh shit, I fucked up. Like, what's going on? And they were like, basically, we want you to manage the Complex sneaker stuff.
Dang.
And that was like one of the hardest situations I've ever dealt with, because I didn't feel qualified to be, like Russ Bankston's boss. And I would never consider myself that. But it was my responsibility to make sure that all of the content that he was creating, manage all of the freelancers, all of the, stuff that like the interns that we had were doing, that became my responsibility. And so, Russ and I had a great relationship, but that like put a little bit of a strain on it for a short amount of time. But I think once we both realized, like I was more analytical and more, I guess in a sense, like thinking more business and strategy, versus like Russ is still to this day, I think, the best writer when it comes to sneakers and basketball. Like the way that he puts things together, is just like, I want to be able to write like that. And, part of this was really a struggle too, because taking that job meant that I would write less. So like, a lot of the stuff that we did back then, I didn't necessarily get to write the stories, but like I would have the ideas and give it to, somebody like we had, Brandon Edler wrote for us back then. And, one of my buddies, Dexter Gordon, was an intern for a while. And, like guys like Nick Schoenberger, like we had a lot of different variety in like the way that people consume sneakers, which was really a beautiful thing. And I think that also turned into me being obsessed with working with every brand and having shoes from every brand, as opposed to just, like the ones that I liked, because I wanted to be able to I wanted you to know, as someone who read my stuff, that, or my team's stuff, that if I'm telling you that this is the best running shoe on the market or the best basketball shoe on the market, that you know that I went and tried all of those shitty shoes to get to that point. Because I think that's one of the things that's missing in sneakers right now is like, you know, and this is no shots at anybody, but like someone might say, oh, you know, the Off-White Air Jordan 5 is the best shoe on the market right now. And then you look at what they have and it's like, okay, well, you've only bought, you know, 6 pairs of Off-Whites in the past 3 years. So how could you say that if you haven't compared it to anything else? That's kind of what turned that. That's why I have storage units now.
That's awesome, man. Like, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's differentiates you from everyone else. Like, hey, I'm not just going to go for, all right, I'm not just going to go for the hype thing, but I'm going to give you everything in between. So that's, I mean, I think that's what we do as a whole a good job with on the website and on the podcast. So I think that still sets us aside from a lot of people, because hype still kind of, you know, rules conversation, and we actually give people, hey, this is that. So I appreciate you bringing that along with you to sneaker history when you started that.
Yeah, I do too. And that's, I'll echo it again, but that's really kind of what sets us apart. You kind of said there, you look up to Russ and his writing and how he puts together things. We only had a couple more minutes left here, but are there any other people, either, doesn't have to be a shoe writer, but who do you look up to? Like who inspires Nick to work better, or your work in general?
I mean, I think like I would definitely, Russ is on that list. You know, Joe LaPuma, as much as he is seen as just like this, you know, kind of like talking head of sneaker shopping, you know, his story, his work ethic is, unmatched. And, you know, starting as an intern at Complex and working, you know, for free for however long until you get to actually get a job, and then, you know, pushing through and like being able to create all these things is, you know, admirable to be able to call him a friend and, you know, be able to talk to him about some of the stuff that goes on in this whole crazy world. You know, I think, you know, Cousteau, Jacques Slade is the other person that comes to mind. He, you know, is one of my best friends, but his work ethic and his commitment to, you know, just, you know, if you haven't listened to that episode of the podcast, just listen, you know, like his story and his passion for it and his just nonstop work is just like absolutely inspiring to me, even, you know, even outside of sneakers, you know, like the amount of work that he puts in is just like mind blowing. And, I mean, I think those are the people kind of close to this space. There's probably a lot of other people out there, but we can get into that another time, maybe.
Well, then, did you have any more questions for him, Robbie?
No.
Well, then it looks like we have to drop him in the hot seat like we were at the end. Give us your top 5 girls, man.
All right. So I don't know if it's possible to say that these are grails every day, because I feel like for me, grails change, like depending on the weather. But I put down a small list, and the first couple are just more honorable mention. So All Eyes on Me, Fila Grant Hill 2, or Grant Hill 96. Okay. A lot of people don't know that shoe released. It released in Japan, and I would say that, you know, Tupac is probably the closest thing to Jesus in my life, in terms of like how I learned how to grow up and my relationship with my mom, my friends, everything. Even going back to like writing, like I started writing poetry because I found out that Tupac wrote poetry like that. You know, this is like whatever, 12, 13-year-old Nick, like kind of figuring out how to grow up. But that shoe is like incredibly important to me. The House of Pain Adidas Campus 80s, another honorable mention, released in like 2009. I ended up getting the shoes because one of the sales reps from Adidas created a Twitter account that was called Addy Special Ops, where he would hunt down shoes for people that couldn't find them. This is like way before Adidas even had like a real corporate Twitter probably. And he ended up getting me a pair of shoes from some random store. They had to ship them to him in Portland, and then he shipped them to me in Austin, Texas, which was just unreal. I'm a big House of Pain fan, so like that was like an amazing moment. But next, okay, top 5. This order might not be correct, but I would say the Michael Schumacher Nike Air Zoom Turf. Most people know the shoe as a Barry Sanders shoe. In '97, Michael Schumacher, the Formula One driver for Ferrari, was signed with Nike, so they made him a version. It's got his autograph stitched into the strap across the foot. That's one of them. The Air Jordan 3 Black Cement is probably, I'm more a fan of the True Blue typically, but the Black Cement is the shoe that I end up wearing more often than most shoes at this point. The Soul Collector, so the Under Armour Bloodline. This is like 2011 when I was at Soul Collector. We did a collaboration with Under Armour. I wouldn't normally put an Under Armour shoe on a list like this, but this shoe is beautiful. It also has my initials and some details around Sacramento because me and Nick DePaula are both from Sacramento, and it's called the Soul Collector Path. So it has all the people that worked for Soul Collector through the years are acknowledged in some way on that shoe. And having your initials and being a part of something like that is just way too special. So that one's definitely up there. Probably one of my favorite shoes of all time is from around 2004 or 2003. John Lennon of the Beatles his foundation did a collaboration with Converse, and they made a bunch of different Peace-inspired Chucks. So I have the Converse Chuck Taylors, and it has peace in like 30 different languages written on it. That's definitely one of my favorite shoes of all time. And then the last one, number 1 on my list, would be the Reebok Question Pearlized Blue Toes. Just, it's too classic. I could pick all sorts of different colorways of the Questions, but that shoe to me is just like that, and the all white lows. I could wear either of those and be good like any day of the week. So that would be my number 1.
Nice. I mean, it's a pretty diverse list. I think we did pretty good at picking diverse lists as a whole. So I like it, man.
Very Nick. I was just thinking like new, rare, not rare, a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about it, I was just like, man, there's so many shoes that I want to put on here. Like, but another one that I didn't put on there, but would be like the S Costin 1, or the Lakai version of it, like when he was with Lakai in between his years with S and Nike. I just love that shoe. I think it's just like the perfect skate shoe for that era. And, but yeah, I don't know. It's so tough to decide. I think like that, for most people that are in sneakers changes so often, because you could have, especially if you've got 50 pair, 100 pair of shoes, whatever it is, you inevitably get excited about newer stuff. And then when you dig into the back of the closet and you're like, oh my God, I forgot about this one. And you just get so excited about it. And that's basically still the thing that drives me with all this sneaker stuff. It's that like feeling of like, of just like, I guess it's just that the feeling that you couldn't have when you were a kid, right? You can do that repeatedly every day if you want to, as an adult. So.
Yeah. You were right, man. Well, dang, I feel like we got to know a whole lot more about Nick today. I know the world already knows where to find you, Nick.
I do too. That's what
At Nick Engvall on all platforms, NickEngvall. VALL. But yeah, just follow at Sneaker History on all the platforms. And thanks for listening. I mean, I just appreciate everybody supporting the podcast, man. It's been so awesome to see how many people are listening on a regular basis and to hear all the feedback. If you have feedback or questions or want to chop it up about sneakers, like as Robbie said in previous episode, I'm not quick to respond, but I will, and I love talking to you guys about it. To everybody out there talking about it, it's just very. There's something special about being able to connect over something like that, and as much as like there's just garbage on the internet, I think like sneakers is the one thing that I've been able to just like cut through all the garbage with. So appreciate everybody supporting.
Dope.
Yes, sir.
I guess that'll be it for us today. So if you guys catch us next time, we appreciate you guys listening. And I guess until we see you again.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
See
Peace.
What up, y'all? This is Nick again. First, I wanted to thank you for listening to the Sneaker History Podcast. It really means a lot that you would spend a part of your day rocking with us. Before you take off, I wanted to ask a few favors. If you're looking for more content from the Sneaker History crew, head over to patreon.com/sneakerhistory. Our Patreon members get access to exclusive episodes of the podcast, our latest merch, giveaways, and much more. You can become a member for as little as $5 a month, and it really goes a long way supporting the crew. Next, make sure you're signed up for our email newsletter. We share updates about the footwear business, some of our favorite finds and deals, and other sneaker-related news a couple times per week. I like to think of it as a one-stop shop for the sneaker game, or at least a work-in-progress one-stop shop for the sneaker game, if you know what I mean. Last but not least, tell someone you like their kicks today. Whether online or in person, social distancing in effect, of course, it helps make the sneaker community a better place, and you never know what conversation and opportunity might come from it. As always, we appreciate you, and we'll catch you next time. Peace. Hey everyone, this is Nick again. Before you take off, do us a solid and head over to Apple Podcasts to leave us a review. Give us a rating on Spotify and Amazon Music, and make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel because we have even more video content coming soon. Speaking of new content, we have an amazing community of sneaker enthusiasts that hang out in our Sneaker History Discord on a daily basis. While sneakers is a connection point that brought us all together, we've all discovered countless shared passions that we have in common with each other. We recently launched a couple of new podcasts directly from our community. One of them is a Formula One podcast. If you're an F1 fan like me, the Exhaust Notes podcast is your weekly fix of Formula One fun. It's hosted by myself, Rohit Malhotra, and Todd Yates. New episodes drop every Tuesday. I've been wearing fitted hats for years and collecting my favorite teams since I was a little leaguer. It has been awesome to see so many new fans getting into fitteds in recent years. Crown and Stitch is our new talk show about fitted hats with Dexter, Keith, and myself, where we talk about fitted hats, snapbacks, throw in some obscure hats because we all kind of like some funky stuff once in a while, don't we? Copping, collecting, and so much more. New episodes drop every Wednesday. Hit the links in the show notes for this episode to give our new shows a listen, and be on the lookout for more new podcasts dropping soon. Last but not least, tell someone you like their kicks today. You never know how far a simple compliment can take you, and we all know how good it feels to have someone show their appreciation. Thank you all for the support, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.